Morning. It is 9 a.m. Central Standard Time, April the 22nd, 2021, here at the Dallas Schools Environmental Education Center on a cloudy, cool morning. And according to the meteorologist, you better get ready for another round of Texas weather because it's going to be pretty rough, I understand, tomorrow night, Friday and Friday evening. We want to say a very special welcome to Fred Florence Young Men's Leadership Academy of Dallas ISD. Thank you so much, guys, for joining us today. We hope you enjoy the program, but most of all, we hope you learn something from it. Teachers, if you are watching and you have not signed up, please do so. Go to www.tiny.cc/EEC register and sign up. This is just for our attendance records only. The program today will be organisms in their environment. During this virtual field trip, students will observe how different environments support different varieties of organisms, describe how biodiversity contributes to the sustainability of an ecosystem, and observe and describe the role of ecological succession. Ms. Fuller will tell you about biomes. Mr. Monroe, microhabitats. Ms. Nash will cover biodiversity and sustainability. We'll have a couple of guest speakers about Texas River biodiversity, and Ms. Ramirez will conclude with ecological succession. During this program, you cannot ask us verbal questions, but you can go to www.tiny.cc/EEC space question, space answer. Send in your questions as long as they pertain to the program, and I will try my best to answer them during the program. If not, I will send the answers to your teacher, and your teacher can discuss them with you. And now I'm going to stop sharing my screen. And Mr. Monroe is going to tell you all about, no, I'm sorry, Ms. Fuller is going to tell you all about biomes.
Good morning, and it's good to see you. This is Earth Day. The first Earth Day was April 22nd, 1970, and it has grown and grown from that date, and it's very important that we are good stewards of our planet. Well, in this segment, we're going to be talking about biomes, so let me share my screen with you. Biomes are communities of plants and animals adapted to a specific climate. So I'm just going to walk through a few with you here today. There are actually a lot of different kinds of biomes, but we're going to talk about the big ones. Let's talk first about some essential questions. Listen for the answers to these two questions. Which biome has very little rainfall and very cold temperatures? And which biome is full of large trees and takes up a good portion of both Russia and Canada? And there are pictures of those two biomes underneath. So the first one we're going to talk about is the tundra. We can have two different kinds. One is alpine, where you find the tundra at very high altitudes in the mountains, or polar. It can be Arctic or Antarctic. The rainfall is very small, only about 6 to 10 inches of precipitation a year. The temperature can get to minus 18 degrees in the winter, and can get up to 54 degrees in the summertime. Plants are lichens, mosses, sedges, grasses, and heath. One distinctive characteristic of tundra is it has permafrost, which makes it very, very difficult for trees to grow there. Just about the only trees you'll find are some small willow trees. And the animals are Arctic animals: caribou, Arctic fox, Arctic hare, musk oxen, snowy owl, lemmings, polar bears. In the Antarctic, we have a lot of large sea mammals like seals and then of course penguins are birds. And in the alpine, we have insects and birds in the summertime. And there's a picture of the tundra. It looks like Texas in February, right? Okay, the taiga is the Boreal Forest. It's also called the Great North Woods. This is the largest biome. It's all across the northern regions of Russia, Norway, Mongolia, Alaska, and Canada. The trees are pines, spruces, birches, larches, willows, lichens, poplars, aspens. The word taiga is a Russian word that means swamp on a hill. it does have a lot of moisture. The animals, lynx, bear, wolves, hares, wolverines, beaver, porcupines, voles, and 32,000 species of insects, and it only gets about 30 inches of rain per year, and the taiga is only about 12,000 years old. And there's a picture of the taiga. Grasslands, that's where we live. We live on the Blackland Prairie. Grasslands are large open areas with relatively low rainfall, and it's suited for grasses. Very few trees grow on grasslands, primarily because of fire. It plays an important role in maintaining the grasslands. Most of the grass is actually underground, so that when the top part, the photosynthesizing part burns up, the plant's still there and it can send up shoots really quickly. Animals, bison, antelope, coyotes, wolves, crayfish, quail, insects, and the plants are grasses. And the grasslands of North America have very deep fertile soil. It's been forming for about 8 to 12,000 years after the end of the last ice age. There we go, right there. Deserts, hot or cold. Deserts have very low rainfall, 10 inches or less, and the amount of evaporation can exceed 10 inches, so it stays dry. The floor can be sand, gravel, rock, or ice. Antarctica is a huge cold desert. Little grows in the desert. You're familiar with Joshua trees, lechugia, cacti, things like that. And then animals would be snakes, Gila monsters, owls, hawks, desert vultures, kangaroo rats, and bearded dragons. There's a picture of the desert. Temperate deciduous forests. They're broadleaf deciduous trees. That means they shed their leaves once a year. It has rich soil. These forests are found in the mid-latitudes below the poles, but before you get to the tropics, the flora, the plants, maples, oak, birch, magnolia, pines, animals, the kinds we find around here: squirrels, rabbits, deer, foxes, woodpeckers, snakes, salamanders, frogs, etc. The forest is arranged in layers: the canopy, the understory, the shrub, and the forest floor, and it has 4 distinct seasons. There's a picture of it in the fall when it's lovely colors. Tropical rainforests are found around the globe. They're hot, moist. They get about 60 to 160 inches of rain per year. They take up less than 3% of the earth, but they have the largest biodiversity. About 1 in 10 known species on earth are in the rainforest. And most living things can be found in the trees because the soil is very poor. I'm going to stop sharing now, and I'm going to pass it over to Dr. Gorman. If you have any questions, you can ask him. Thanks.
Wow, Ms. Fuller, that was a tremendous amount of information in a short period of time. Thank you for sharing that with us. And the student wants to know a brief description of a biome. A biome is a large area characterized by its vegetation, soil, climate, and wildlife. There are 5 major types of biomes: aquatic, grassland, forest, desert, and tundra, though some of these biomes can be divided into much more specific categories. Thank you again, Ms. Fuller. And now Mr. Monroe is going to tell us all about microhabitats.
Good morning, students. My name is Mr. Monroe, and we're going to be looking at what we call microhabitats. Of course, you guys know, students, you know that a habitat is a place where an animal lives. And there has to be certain things there to meet that animal or organism's basic needs: food, water, shelter, and space. Well, in a microhabitat, better yet, I've got a little short presentation I want you guys to observe, and maybe it'll give you a better idea of what I can say to give you a full description of what a microhabitat consists of. So bear with me while I share my screen with you. Habitats are where a place that an animal lives, it provides the animal with food, water, and shelter, like I stated before. There are many different sorts of habitats around the world, from forests to grasslands, and from mountain slopes to deserts. Different habitats are home to different animals. They live well together because they all do things to help keep the whole habitat healthy. Microhabitat is a very small, specialized habitat, such as it could be a clump of grass, a space even between rocks. It is a habitat for extremely small creatures such as wood lice, which they are very, very tiny. A small part of a habitat is a microhabitat. For example, over in our Post Oak Preserve, there are lots of microhabitats. You know, a microhabitat has its own conditions of temperature and light, and its own characteristic species that exist there. Microhabitats include the shady area under a tree and the underside of a rock in a stream. It could be a fallen log. This is a microhabitat. It is dark and warm inside. Many beasts live here because they can eat the rotten wood, keep moist in the dark inside, and burrow out of the sun. They are safe from birds that want to eat them. Leaf litter is another microhabitat. It is the home of animals that like to be warm, damp, and dark. The animals can nest or hide to protect themselves. Creatures that may be found in a leaf litter may be a peel bug, a beetle, a snail, a worm, a centipede, or a millipede. And a rock pool. Now, I'm going to stop sharing your screen because I have a couple of mini beasts that I want to show you. So at this point, let me stop sharing my screen. Yesterday, I went into the Post Oak Preserve, students, and one of my favorite insects can be found inside of a dead log. And I'm going to get one out for you guys. They look quite threatening. If I can get you guys to look at this, they look quite threatening. They have what appears to be pinchers in the front of the head part of this insect. And actually, those are mandibles that they use to chew wood. This is called a best beetle. Now, best beetles are amazing because it is said that they can actually move over 20 times their own body mass. They're very slow, but you can see he's not going to use those mandibles to pinch my skin. Basically, that is a structural adaptation used to chew wood because that's what they like to eat. And most of the time, you're going to find this little beetle probably pretty close to our inside of a log that probably has come from some oak tree. That's their favorite rotted wood to consume, okay? So that is an example of a mini beast that would be found in the type of microhabitat that we would call a log or a rotted log. Now I'm gonna put this best bug back up, and I have another beast, a mini beast that I'd like to show you. Now the microhabitat that this mini beast would come from would be what we call the leaf litter, because it loves to consume dead leaves. This is a millipede. Pretty good sized millipede. Now the millipedes, I didn't get this from the Post Oak Preserve. I got this from we ordered this, and this millipede is what we call a North American millipede, if you guys can see that. They don't bite. They do have mandibles that they use to chew the leaves up. Now, milla is a Latin origin word that means 1,000. Pede means feet. So this little critter is supposed to have 1,000 feet. Now, you know what? if you were to count each one of these line segments, if I can get it around here, this little guy has line segments. And if you were to count each one of those little line segments and multiply it times 4, it has 2 pair of legs for each line segment. You could come up with the exact number that this millipede has, okay? So this would be a mini beast that lives in leaf litter. And of course, the best bug would be a mini beast that would live inside a dead log. So those are 2 examples of terrestrial mini habitats, okay? Now, there are many habitats that are actually found in water, but we don't have the time to go over those. What I'm going to do now is that I'm going to turn it back over to Dr. Gorman. So if any of you have any questions about mini habitats, maybe he can answer those questions for you. I want you guys to have a good day.
Thank you, Mr. Monroe. And the next time that I'm looking for something really exciting to do, I'm going to get a millipede and count those rings and multiply it by 4. But I'm going to come find you and give you the answer. All right. We have a student that wanted us to tell about another microhabitat here at the Environmental Center. Okay, first off, I'm going to give you a definition. A habitat which is of small or limited extent and which differs in character from some surrounding more extensive habitat. All right, and the example around here is in our pond, we have clumps of algae. And within that clump of algae, that is a microhabitat. There are many little organisms and all that live within, just in that algae and nowhere else in the pond. So that is an example of a microhabitat here at the Environmental Education Center. And now we're going to listen to Ms. Nash tell us all about biodiversity and sustainability. Thank you.
Hello, welcome to my classroom. Today is again Earth Day. And so one thing we need to think about is the biodiversity of our entire planet, because all those creatures and all those plants and all the fungi and everything on that planet are part of one big global system, okay? And preserving that system is what's going to preserve all life. Let's look at a few pictures really quickly. So this map here shows what they call hotspots of biodiversity. Notice that most of the species-rich areas are in the tropics. So biodiversity is the diversity of species and within species. That includes animals, plants, fungi, and the habitat, the ecosystem, or the biome, or the microhabitat. Sustainability refers to stability and adaptability of those ecosystems over time, okay, given changes such as climate change. The biodiversity is going to help those ecosystems survive, we hope, the bad times to come. Biodiversity contributes to sustainability because since everything is connected, more connections means the system is better able to survive environmental stress. So I have this really cute little picture here on the left of Cubans. These snails are from Cuba. And this is an example of diversity or variability within a species. So that lots of different colors. So you might think, well, why would those help? Because if things change and the color of the environment changes, certain colors are better able to hide from predators. Now, biodiverse habitats exist around the world, and the world itself being one big ecosystem. Plants and animals have evolved complex webs of interdependent life. And these are just a few of the amazing pictures of different kinds of very biodiverse habitats, coral reefs, tropical rainforests, coastal areas. Deserts are actually quite biodiverse, and this kind of coastal areas with all these different little low growing shrubs. So what's happening to all this diversity? Well, people, basically. People, and we do mining, we deforest, mountaintop removal in our very own country, in Appalachian Mountains. They chop down the mountain, they dump all the extra soil into the creek bed, destroying the creek. And there you have it. That's coal mining. Hopefully we can stop using coal because it's really bad for the climate. Deforestation, okay? There are lots of animals that were living in these trees, but not anymore. Coral bleaching. The coral reefs are like the nurseries of the ocean ecosystem. Lots and lots of fish and other animals live there, and pollution and global warming, acidification are destroying coral reefs all over the world. It's really a big, big problem. So of course, buildings, okay, here we have housing development. I'm sure there was a forest or a field there before that had lots of plants and animals, no more. And the other problem that happens with people is that when we build a house, we all plant the same thing. We have a lawn and we have a tree, we have a shrub, maybe a few flowers, but all the same thing. And most of the ones we plant were not there originally. They're exotic species like Bermuda grass or St. Augustine grass. And then, of course, another really big problem for biodiversity is monoculture factory farming. Okay, endless fields of one plant. Okay, and of course, lots of pesticides need to be used on that one plant. They can affect everything around it. Okay, so all these things are things that are destroying the biodiversity of the planet. So in our own country, we do have hotspots of biodiversity. The Appalachian Mountains has the highest biodiversity of salamanders on the planet. Lots of rain there, beautiful mountains. This giant salamander called the Hellbender can be 3 feet long. Okay. This little one over here, the Otter Hill, has now, the known range is only 45 square miles. Okay. So they're in like little microhabitat. That's a pretty microhabitat. Okay. And again, they're affected by that mountaintop removal, by urbanization, by air pollution, etc. They are amphibians. Okay. So they're particularly sensitive to environmental degradation because they spend part of their life in the water and they have that permeable skin. They're kind of a canary in the coal mine. In the west, there's Sky Islands, Arizona, and other desert states, including Texas. We have these what we call Sky Islands. The mountains come up out of the desert and they're cooler, there's more rainfall. And so the desert has a high biodiversity of its own, all kinds of cactus and other plants that live there, and animals. And then up in the mountain, you have fir trees and water and more grasses. Okay, so these habitats are very diverse. Okay, because of the changes in altitude, and because they're on the border with Mexico, we also have animals like this is a jaguar. Okay, they've actually been they have these cameras out, and they find jaguars coming into Arizona and even Big Bend. Okay, they spotted one. Also, the Mexican gray wolf. Both these animals are critically endangered. And also lots of exotic birds that exist nowhere else but in that. Well, they exist farther south in Mexico and Central America, but this is the only place in the US that they can be seen, different kinds of trogon and I think the Lucifer. Then even closer to home, we have the South Texas border, and we have, again, critically endangered, just an ocelot, okay, critically endangered, all kinds of butterflies, that border wall, okay, the construction, you can see what they've done here. The construction of that border wall is destroying the habitat itself. They went right through the National Butterfly Center and destroyed a lot of that. And of course, then the wall itself means that animals can't go back and forth, which they would naturally do. So our ecosystem depends on everything in it surviving. Okay. Once you eliminate one animal, you can have a cascade effect. Particularly, we like to eliminate the top predator. We like to simplify the ecosystem, and that turns out to be a really bad thing for everyone concerned. So it's up to us, particularly on Earth Day today, to choose, okay, how we treat our planet. We need to appreciate, honor, and protect that diverse life that sustains us all. So think about it, and if you have any questions, you can ask Dr. Bowman. There we go.
Thank you, Ms. Nash. Question came in, a brief description of biodiversity and sustainability. Biodiversity refers to the variety of living species on Earth, including plants, animals, bacteria, and fungi. While Earth's biodiversity is so rich that many species have yet to be discovered, imagine that, many species are being threatened with extinction due to the human activities, putting the Earth's magnificent biodiversity at risk. Sustainability focuses on meeting the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their needs. The concept of sustainability is composed of three pillars: economic, environmental, and social, also known informally as profits, planet, and people. And now Mr. Broughton is going to introduce a guest speaker, or two guest speakers, I believe.
Thank you, Dr. Gorman. Yes, I'm going to introduce to you two guest speakers who work at the Texas Commission on Environmental Quality. So you can see their website right there. It is tceq.texas.gov. And you can tell right off the bat, they help take care of our air, land, and water here in Texas. And our special guests' name are Miss Lee and Miss Seckitz, and they specialize on water and especially Texas river biodiversity. So they kind of piggyback on what Ms. Nash just explained. So I'm going to let them show you and tell you about what they do.
At the Texas Commission on Environmental Quality, or TCEQ for short, we take our job of protecting the environment very seriously. Not only are we preserving the air, water, and land, but we also protect the people and animals who live here too.
By monitoring air quality, keeping the water clean, and ensuring that our waste is properly disposed of, TCEQ is keeping the environment of Texas pristine for years to come.
Hi, I'm Jill. I'm a technical specialist at TCEQ. I work on everything from endangered species to assessing water quality. There are many challenges in Texas that make this an interesting job. Protecting our surface water is extremely important to support aquatic communities and habitats, as well as our increasing human population. The favorite part of my job is learning new things about water quality and water resources and applying this knowledge to protect surface water.
Hello, I'm Brittany. I'm an aquatic scientist at TCEQ. I work for the Water Quality Division, where I look at how various facilities impact our aquatic resources, how construction activities affect our aquatic ecosystems, and how these various human activities impact our endangered species, and so much more. A large part of my job is outside, where I do field work like stream and wetland assessments. The best part of my job is physically being in the environments that are being studied, impacted, and ultimately protected. I love knowing that what I do keeps people swimming, keeps the fish happy, and keeps our environments beautiful.
Texas is one of the most biodiverse states in the continental U.S. This is mainly because of our size, but also because of our many different ecosystems. Texas has over 800 habitat types that are home to tens of thousands of native plants and animal species.
Some of the most unique habitats in Texas are the many rivers that wind throughout our state. We have 15 major rivers and 3,700 different named streams. They all have their unique ecosystems of animals and plants.
These aquatic habitats include low gradient, murky streams with lots of submerged wood in the piney woods of East Texas, clear spring-fed streams of the Central Texas Hill Country and Edwards Plateau, and the shallow streams and rivers flowing through steep slopes and canyons of the high plains.
It's so important to monitor the health of the rivers because water is essential for all forms of life. The rivers provide a home for aquatic life, including fish, insects, mussels, turtles, frogs, and even some mammals, such as river otters.
The health of the river directly impacts the organisms that live in and around it. For example, when the oxygen levels in the water change dramatically, only organisms that can tolerate low dissolved oxygen may survive. This reduction of biodiversity has negative impacts on ecosystems.
This is especially important for the many endangered species that live in Texas, since they depend on their habitat staying clean and healthy. An example of this can be found in the city of Austin, a place where you might not expect to find a critically endangered species. Near the popular Barton Springs pool, you can find some shy little amphibians called the Barton Springs Salamanders. The only place on the planet to find these little guys is in a handful of springs in the heart of Texas. They are very sensitive to any chemicals that enter the springs, so runoff from construction sites and other human activity can hurt the population size. Scientists are working to restore the species by planting natural vegetation and monitoring the water quality.
The more plants and animals that exist in an ecosystem, the more likely it is to thrive. And water quality is a key component. It is important for us as scientists to make sure that water is protected and conserved to ensure these ecosystems and the organisms that live there flourish.
Although the state of Texas is full of a wide variety of diverse species of plants and animals, we must do our part to keep it that way. Some ways you can help protect the biodiversity of Texas rivers are: dispose of your waste properly, pick up trash you see outdoors, especially near the waterways, conserve water around your home, and since plastics break down very slow in aquatic habitats, it's really important that we reduce, reuse, and recycle.
All right, and I'd like to thank Ms. Seckitz and Ms. Lee for sharing their expertise on Texas river biodiversity. And now if you have any questions about Texas river biodiversity and sustainability, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Gorman to answer any of those questions.
Yes, one student wanted to know, what can we do to help conserve and protect the water? And one thing that I have learned lately, and my wife thinks I'm crazy, is when I take a shower in the morning, it takes a long time for my water to get hot enough. So I've been putting a bucket under it and catching that cold water that comes out first and watering my plants with it. And I don't think she thinks that I still am functioning properly. I think she thinks I'm about half crazy, but it has saved about 10 gallons of water a day. Thank you again. And Ms. Ramirez is going to tell us about ecological succession.
Hello, my name is Ms. Ramirez, and in this segment, we're going to be learning about succession. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen with you guys, and then we'll start our presentation. So I do have a couple of essential questions. So hopefully by the end of this presentation, you'll be able to answer these two questions. The first question is, you should be able to explain the two types of ecological succession. And the second question is, you should be able to identify and explain two causes of succession. So keep those questions in mind as we go through the presentation. And then the video to your left are some examples of pond succession here at the Environmental Center. So our pond goes through a lot of changes over the years. Some years there's water, some years there's not water. And so in the video, you can see how our pond has changed over time. So when we have periods of drought, the water level starts to get lower. We also experience eutrophication. So essentially with eutrophication, it's a process in which there's excess nutrients, usually from runoff, that end up in the waterways. And that excess nutrients actually causes a huge algae bloom, and that's what you're seeing in that picture there. And because of that huge algae bloom, eventually some of those plant material is going to die, and it ends up creating hypoxic conditions where there's very little oxygen in the water. And then that will eventually lead to the death of many of our fish and other organisms that are in that water. So what's really cool is after that process of eutrophication happens, Then we start seeing a lot of our dead fish and other organisms. But one year there were dozens of dead fish skeletons just scattered around, and it was pretty interesting to study and look at those. So ecosystems are constantly changing. And then in the video, you can see not only were fish affected, but also crawfish as well. And here's another example of that pond succession. So this line right here is the old water line. The pond water used to come all the way up here, and that used to be all underwater. However, we know ecosystems change, and eventually, because that water receded, we are now able to have grasses starting to come in and grow. Now, if it continues to stay dry and not fill up, eventually that grass area will then lead to a thick shrub area. So again, it is interesting to see how our pond changes. Now we're going to talk about the two main types of succession. So take a moment to compare and contrast the two types of succession. So what do you guys notice in these infographics? So again, feel free to pause the video if you want to allow time for discussion and observation. But I'm going to go ahead and jump right into it. So hopefully you guys were able to notice that the main difference between primary and secondary succession has to do with primary succession starts when there is bare rock and there is no soil present. So in primary succession is when a community starts to grow in an area that has no soil. So it's just bare rock. And the first organisms that start to live in an uninhabited area, we call those the pioneer species. So take a look over here at our pioneer species for primary succession. Those would be things like lichen and moss. And those species are super important because they actually grow on that rock, and they help to break down the rock, which we know is called weathering. And as they're helping to break down that rock, they're actually contributing to soil formation. So we know that soil is formed from the weathering of rock and then the eventual decomposition of that plant material. So those pioneer species are super important because they help to create the soil, which other producers then need to grow. Again, so that's the main difference, is primary succession occurs when there is bare rock versus secondary succession, which occurs in areas that have been disturbed, but they still have soil. So for example, if an ecosystem was affected by a fire or flood, the plants and trees might have died, but the soil still exists. So that is the main difference between those two types of succession. And then in our next slide, we're just going to talk a little bit more about the difference between a pioneer and climax community. So remember, in a pioneer community, those are going to be the first organisms that inhabit an area. And we learned that in primary succession, those pioneer species are going to be your lichens and mosses. But in secondary succession, those pioneer species might be small grasses or small plants. Now compare the pioneer communities to those climax communities, and what are some things that you notice? So the climax communities are going to be your more stable, mature communities. So for example, think of the California redwood forest. Those are a climax community. Now it is important to note that just because an area has reached its climax community part of succession, that it can change. So the climax community is not necessarily the final stage of succession. We know that communities or ecosystems are constantly changing. So unfortunately, a fire or a flood or a natural disaster could come in and disturb a climax community, and then the whole cycle of succession can restart. So it is very interesting, again, to observe how ecosystems are constantly changing. Now, there's a couple of causes for succession. So some causes can be gradual or slow, and then some can be sudden or fast. So examples would be things like seasonal changes. So for example, here at the Environmental Center, we experience the seasonal changes with our ponds. And then also things like climate change, which can cause more permanent changes. And then some examples of sudden causes would be things like major disturbances. Think of floods, fires, storms. Also natural disasters like tsunamis, volcanic eruptions, landslides. All of those can drastically change an area. And then other examples that can fall into either a gradual or sudden cause could be things like invasive species, deforestation, land conversion. So for example, when, say a farmer wants to convert a prairie into a cropland. So we're changing that environment. Also lack of management. So like a good example would be for me, I hate mowing my lawn. And if I don't mow the lawn, my yard's gonna slowly start to turn into a big weeded area full of weeds and shrubs. And that has happened before because I just let the yard grow. So again, lack of land management as well. And then so I have a quick challenge for you guys. Observe an ecosystem or microhabitat over time and think about what are some changes that you notice. So some ideas to get you started. For example, I mentioned the lawn. Try not mowing a small area of your lawn for just a few months and observe how that little section changes over time. Another example would be if you have a garden at home or at school, try not weeding out a small patch of that area for a few months and notice how those organisms change and what starts to happen. And a good example would be here at school. I have a little garden area. It's kind of a maintained landscape area where I put rock in. However, if I let that area go and I don't consistently weed out the grasses, it will eventually look like this if I don't constantly go out there and take out the grass, and then eventually that whole area is just going to be overrun again. So think about those changes that occur in certain areas. And then another good example, this was here recently, there was that volcanic eruption in Iceland. I think it was back in March. So explain the process of succession after this eruption. So think about all the organisms that died because of this volcanic eruption. Think of how that ecosystem has changed because of it. And then think about how will it change afterwards. So that was something pretty cool. And on a side note, this video was taken from a photographer here from North Texas, Mike Mazul, and he actually started his interest in photography at the age of 15. So photography is something pretty cool, especially if it's environmental photography. So I'm going to go ahead and stop our screen share, and that's all I have for you guys today on succession. We're going to give it back to Dr. Borman to answer any questions.
Hey, Mr. Ramirez, thank you so much. A student wants a brief description of ecological succession. Ecological succession is the process of change in the species structure of an ecological community over time. The time scale can be, now listen to this, the time scale can be decades or even millions of years after a mass extinction. Thank you again, Mr. Ramirez. Thank you, students. And now I am going to share my screen. During this virtual field trip, students observed how different environments support different varieties of organisms, described how biodiversity contributes to the sustainability of an ecosystem, and observed and described the role of ecological succession. Ms. Fuller talked to you about biomes. Mr. Monroe covered microhabitats. Mrs. Nash, biodiversity and sustainability. Our two guests covered Texas River biodiversity, which is very interesting. And Ms. Ramirez performed ecological succession to you. Thank you so much. And how did we do? Teachers, if you would, go to www.tiny.cc/EEC feedback, fill out a very short form and send to it. We would appreciate it. That will let us know if we're on the right track. Thank you again for joining us today. We hope you have a great day, but more importantly, I hope you have a great life. Thank you.